Hey, everybody. So I wanted to talk to you about cell communication in this presentation. So obviously, with what we've seen and dealt with already, we recognize the fact that cells need to be able to communicate with other cells to function and survive. They are responsible for the growth and development of multicellular organisms. So obviously, we need to be able to have all of the different cells and different types of cells communicate and work together for the whole functioning of the multicellular organism. So that brings us to the question of, well, how do they communicate? And there are three general ways that cells are going to communicate. They will communicate through direct contact, cell to cell direct contact. They can use local signaling, so they can release little chemical signals right in the area that they're trying to communicate. And then, of course, there is long distance signaling. So first we talk about direct contact. And you can see by the pictures here that what we're talking about is this like little, almost like little tunnels between cells that connect cells that allow chemicals to pass. And they can control if these little tunnels are open or closed. But so when we're talking about direct contact, we're talking about contact through these cell junctions where two different cells will connect with each other. And so the signaling substances, the little chemical messengers and such that are being passed, and any other necessary materials that are going to be in the cytoplasm can actually pass from one cell into the next cell through these junctions. In animals, these are called gap junctions, and in plant cells, we call them plasmodesmata. And we talked about the plasmodesmata in particular back when we were dealing with photosynthesis. So for an example, when we're talking about immune cells, the antigen presenting cells will communicate with the T cells. So here's the blue is our immature T cell. And this green blobby thing is our antigen presenting cell. And so there is a connection between the antigen, and it actually can allow the maturation of those T cells so that they can perform the necessary functions. But without that initial connection and initial communication, the immature T cells really won't be completely functional. Next, we had our local regulators. And so the idea here is that while they're not directly in contact, we're still talking about communication between two cells that are basically next to each other. And so one cell will release some sort of chemical messenger, that local regulator or ligand, and it will travel, the little bit of distance from one cell to the next through the extracellular fluid. That messenger still will cause a response in that target cell, that nearby cell. So paracrine signaling, synaptic signaling, these are all examples for these local regulators. So what do we mean when we say paracrine signaling? So you'll notice that the secretory cells are released. That's our little polka dots here. Via exocytosis. So we see how we have the little vesicles inside the cell, and as they move to the membrane, ultimately they're released. And then they will be picked up by receptors with the target cell and cause the behavior, the action within the target cell. Synaptic signaling, typically you're going to find it between two different neurons, or between a neuron and a gland, or a neuron and a muscle cell, some sort of tissue that we're needing to send these signals. But the concept is basically the same. So we have the neuron secreting neurotransmitters into little vesicles, and they eventually can be released into the synaptic cleft. They'll diffuse across, get picked up by the receptors, and cause the target cell to perform whatever behavior is being requested. And then we have the long distance signaling. So this is where we can actually take the information from a cell in one place. And so let's just say, theoretically, you have a cell in the head and we need to get that signal to a cell in the big toe. So that would be long distance. And so typically in both plants and animals, we use hormones. A lot of people are familiar with the concept of hormones within animal cells, but they don't really think about it with plants, but plants use hormones as well. Plants will release those hormones into the vascular tissue. And remember, vascular tissue is basically like our blood vessels. So our xylem and phloem in plants. Or they can actually be released out through the air to reach target tissue. So we can actually have two different plants cells communicating with each other if it's released outside of one plant and picked up by a neighboring plant or another plant. In animals, they use what we call endocrine signaling. Endocrine system is the system that is focused on the hormones. So there are specialized cells that release the hormones into the circulatory system where they're carried through the body until they reach target cells. And we'll find that the target cells are not just typically one specific place. They may be on multiple locations throughout the body. So a good example for long distance signaling would be insulin. It's released by the pancreas. It's one of the two key functions. The other function with the pancreas has to do with digestion. But in terms of its endocrine, insulin is released by the pancreas into the bloodstream, and it will circulate and it will bind to target cells and get them to take in sugar that's in the bloodstream. Okay, so what type of communication involves a cell secreting a substance to an adjacent target cell? And that's going to be paracrine signaling. Plant cells in direct contact with each other can diffuse substances throughout these structures to communicate. Plasmodesmata, because we specified plant cells. And so the last thing I want you to think about is, how do you think cells process these signals? So we've made it clear that they do communicate, but once the signal comes in, how do they process it to make the action occur? Okay, so hopefully you think about that and come up with some interesting answers. See you in the next lesson. Bye.